Welcome back to Snowman's Favorites, the series where we look at strong and effective builds that have become a staple in my own gameplay and the ones I've really enjoyed. Today we're looking at the unarmed dodge build that is famous for its ability to punch enemies to death with your bare fists. We've found this build in Season 7 experimenting with using your fists to kill people. We found that it's pretty good at damage, and it's a pretty good frontliner. Just a staple for your team, and as everyone needs frontliners, this one will do well in that spot. It is very fast and defensive. You don't use a weapon, so therefore it doesn't slow you down. You wear very light armor. And with dodge being your major source of defense, that really stacks well, and it just holds out on the front line quite decently. You hit multiple times per turn, very helpful in case of accuracy, and just for presence on the battlefield, which also can turn into the use of Overwhelm. Overwhelm is a very, very valuable perk that, when utilized, can make you the best 1v1 dueler in the game. It is also strong versus most enemies in armor. You wouldn't expect fists to be good against armor, but they're actually pretty decent at it, and eventually can whittle down foes quite well with their multiple hits per turn. But unfortunately, this build suffers from a quite extensive amount of cons. So initially, this is only one build option. There is practically no customization to an unarmed build. If you don't build it a certain way, it just won't work. It'll be very subpar, and it won't perform well enough to keep with toe with the rest of your brothers doing damage. It is heavily stat reliant. You're dealing with at least 4 stats minimum, and it's gonna be rough if you don't have a bro that is jacked with stats. Also, unfortunately, it is heavily perk reliant. You need a lot of base perks, a lot of non-negotiable perks for this build, or you're just gonna fall behind or become a meat sack on the front that'll just die when things get tough. Also, as you can tell, you're not using a weapon and you're not using a shield, so arrows are a problem and defense is a problem, so that just makes stats and perks even more important as you're relying on all of that to carry you through. Also, because this build is so reliant on everything that I've just previously stated, it needs babysitting. Now, we haven't gone through a babysitting build in this series yet, but we may find a few more as we go along. Now, a babysitting build means it cannot perform until a certain level, which means it needs to sit in the back line, it needs to be protected until it can get to its effectiveness in combat. And that means multiple battles of keeping this bro alive without it being super effective. So you need other good bros to take care of it until it's time. So that can be rough for some people, or it can be rough for some parties. So that is definitely a con here. Also, it has fatigue issues. Now, as much as I love fatigue neutral builds, sadly, this is not a fatigue neutral build. To make this build fatigue neutral would make it exorbitantly reliant on stats to try and make it even mind over body as well, and that is just not feasible in a normal game of Battle Brothers Legends. So we're gonna have to live with some fatigue issues, unfortunately, but we will try and mitigate those, and I'll show you how. But last but not least, armor optimization will be difficult. As with all nimble and dodge builds, it will be difficult to optimize your armor to make it give you as much value as possible, but the least amount of fatigue used. So that is always a difficult thing to have, and famed items and Vala armor is something that will get you there. Well, this here is the only build that we have today. This is the triple punch man or the quadruple punch man, depending on what part of Legends you play, but we'll explain that in a minute. It is heavily reliant on stats, as mentioned before. You actually need 4 main stats, but you still need to get to the thresholds of a frontliner. So as usual, you want a melee attack of at least 85, but you want to max it out as much as possible. We got to 88 here at level 12, which is pretty decent. You'd still want to go higher if possible, because you're not getting any bonuses to your accuracy when punching with fists. So you kind of just want to keep going for the moon. 25 melee defense is what is recommended. You're not using a shield, but you are relying on dodge. So obviously more melee defense is better, but 25 will keep you fairly healthy on the front lines. Initiative at least 120 is recommended strongly. That'll keep your dodge high, it'll keep you fast on your turn order, and it'll just pump up that defense when you are in good positions with your fatigue. And you obviously want a high health pool. 60 is the bare minimum, but I definitely recommend going higher. 80 here kept us alive quite well. But don't stop there. We have some very important suggestions to make. Please max out your melee attack and melee defense. Those are your primary stats in almost all of our builds that sit on the front line. You need at least a minimum of 50 resolve. Getting morale checked on the front line is difficult. So no, it says 4 main stats, but resolve is still technically a main stat, but you don't need to go crazy into it. But 50 to 60 is a good area to be in. And last but not least, just stack that health and initiative. Having good health is okay, but initiative is gonna really pump the build. The other thing that I didn't mention earlier, and the reason why stats are even more important, is because the damage of an unarmed build isn't based on like a weapon damage that's static. It changes. It is based on your hit points and your speed. So the higher initiative and hit points you have, the more damage you will do. So stacking these two is very good for your damage output, but I still wouldn't say stacking health and initiative is more important than your melee attack and melee defense, because that's your bread and butter. You need accuracy, you need to stay alive. You need your resolve to make sure you don't get completely morale checked by any little thing on the battlefield, but you do need to have enough damage to stay relevant on the front lines. So HP and initiative definitely there for the different reasons of survivable in terms of taking hits of HP, or initiative to give you better dodge and still better damage. Now when it comes to perks, this build is also very heavily reliant on perks. Stats are one thing, but if you don't have the perks, you just can't do this build. It needs 7 major perks to be the baseline for this build, and that is tough. It's a lot of asking there. Luckily, brawlers are pretty good to make an unarmed build. They give you an extra 25% damage bonus to your punching, and they usually come with most of the perks that you need, and hunting around brawlers makes things easier and just simple. But here we go. These are the perks you need. Unarmed training. Very, very important, and you can pair that with unarmed mastery to actually make your fists hurt. Normally fists will do like 1 to 5 damage, but in order to do up to like 30 to 60 damage, you need to get the unarmed training and mastery to reduce the action point cost, the fatigue cost, and allow the conversion of your health and initiative into damage for calculation purposes. You also need dodge and relentless. You can't have dodge without relentless, and relentless without dodge is I don't even know why you would do it. But dodge and relentless is the only way to keep your defense high without a shield, and it allows it to keep you fast on the battlefield. Nimble just pairs immensely well with dodge, and it helps in case you do take a hit that you can take multiple hits in unlucky situations. Freedom of movement is just another bonus icing on the cake, but I can't say you can live without it, unfortunately. Freedom of movement gives you an even better scaling defensive reduction to whatever damage is coming to you by how fast you are compared to your opponent. So the value of initiative is just even higher here because it'll boost more damage reduction on your bro. Last but not least, recover. As I said before, fatigue issues are a problem, so recover is vital. Now, we were testing this bro out in season 7, and we were stamming out a lot, so I really should have grabbed recover, but I was trying out choke, I was trying out pathfinder, which was really good paired with athletic, so this bro took very little fatigue to run around the battlefield, which is very helpful, but we did stam out in medium to long battles and could only punch less than what our normal DPS was without recover. You have 10 perks available to your bros, so you have 3 perks you can start adding and fixing areas where you feel that your bro can be more effective. Now, the suggestions I have here to enhance your build really base around 3 options. Fatigue, because yes, obviously fatigue's a problem. Recover solves that problem, but to extend your active use of this build, Pathfinder and Perfect Fit are 2 great options to reduce the cost of your actions and your movement. Speed is another thing you want to enhance in this build. Overwhelm to abuse opponents that you're faster than will make you a 1v1 king with this build. It is going to be making you amazing. Alert will give you a 20% bonus to initiative, and that is glorious. I love alert in dodge builds. Or the third option you have is more defensives. The longer you stay alive with this build, the more impact you can have. Colossus to give you extra health that does more damage and also keeps you alive. Underdog to help you on the front line so you don't get surrounded are great choices. You can get things like Steel Brow if you feel like it. Whatever defensive you feel your bros are best suited for, go for it. But you have to really be specific with what you choose because you only really have 3 perks left once finishing this build. So make sure you choose the suggestions and the enhancing perks that suit your bro the best or the way you play the best. Now finally, what is the result of this build? Simply put, it's 3 single target hits per turn, or 4 target hits per turn, because in the newer versions of Legends, I'll show you the difference. But as you expected, the fatigue's an issue. So in the good old days when we had this build, it was 3 action points with 8 fatigue. You'd hit it 3 times a turn, pretty decent damage of 29 to 54, but now it's 6 fatigue for 4 times per turn because of 2 action points, which is still 24 fatigue per turn. Rebound won't fix that. Battle flow won't fix that. Only thing that will fix that is rebound combined with mind over body, but since we're using 7 perks to make this build work and so many stats, it is practically impossible to make this build fatigue neutral. So I highly recommend that you try and use that recover. Nowadays, hand-to-hand attack is 2 action points, 6 fatigue, 61 to 86 damage on a basic like 61 health row with about 111 initiative. I think that's the test that I put there, which is pretty disgusting. It's been buffed and hand-to-hand combat is pretty good. It's got great damage output, and you can see here it's very good against health and armor. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, 61 to health, 61 to armor. If you do use your brawler backgrounds, you are including 25% damage bonus just because of the background you chose. It's not a perk. You don't have to do anything fancy for it. You just have to have a brawler and you just get free damage. It's a killing frenzy that doesn't need to be proc. So I highly recommend brawlers for this build. The other good thing about this build is you have the high initiative and melee defense. You're going to be a speed demon on the battlefield, allows the great 1v1s, allows you to outplay your opponents, allows you to move before your opponents even move on the battlefield. Positioning is great, and if you use overwhelm, you're going to be a king in 1v1s. Almost nothing can compare with you. As you saw in the build earlier, we chose choke, and in the clips you'll see in a moment where we have a bit of gameplay, choke is a trap, and in my opinion, unarmed lunge is also a trap. Now, they are core parts of the build in terms of all of the unarmed assets, but I do not recommend them. I really can't recommend choke and unarmed lunge. Now, choke is basically puncture for daggers, but for unarmed weapons. Now, as you can see there, it is 4 action points and it builds 30 fatigue. That is insane. Way too expensive. It's twice the action point cost of hand-to-hand attacks, and it's 5 times the amount of fatigue. This is with unarmed mastery and with unarmed training. It is not viable. It'll be a waste of your perk. Don't take it. The lunge, unarmed lunge, also known as jump attack in some of the versions, is 5 action points, but at least it only builds up 15 fatigue. It used to cost 6 action points. So you can see down there, it costs -1 action point due to unarmed training, but it's not like fencer builds where the lunge is the main source of the damage, does crazy damage. Unarmed lunge is expensive and does less damage than just punching at 2 action points and 6 fatigue. We learned pretty early on that walking up to an opponent and punching them was better than lunging at them with your fists. It just is. The only time I would recommend unarmed lunge is if you're in endgame battles that are gigantic and you somehow need to get to that necromancer in the back, or you somehow need to start getting after their archers or their drummers or whatever the heck you need to get to their back lines, and you have a zone of control problem. Then I can say, yeah, probably. But even then, I'm like, you know what? Just walk through your opponents. You've got crazy melee defense, crazy dodge. Don't get lunge, don't get choke. Not worth it. But all in all, I still think this is a very fun build with very good damage. Relying on a lot of fatigue issues, you will stam out, but you can unleash pretty good damage whilst your bro has a high fatigue pool. So I can strongly recommend this build. Have some fun with it and see how you go. Technically he's the only one that can join the fight here, so Bloodbane might as well. We need unfortunate 43s, but we got one of them. Nice punch to the face. I'm gonna go here and get that nice punch. Beautiful hit. And now we punch him to death. Ooh, we could try and go for the choke. That worked. We could only do 2 chokes because it's whatchamacallit, not the same action points as punching. So maybe it's good because we don't have to worry about the armor, but it's also bad because we don't get enough hits. Oh, and also uses a heck of a ton of fatigue, so we shouldn't use it very often. Everything's gone to custard. But we're punching people to death, that's nice. starting to flee. And now he's dead. So that works. Well, I hope you enjoyed this build today. It's a very unorthodox build to run at people with your fists, but I highly recommend you try it out. The highest speeds are very fun to play in this game, but you still have to be wary of staggers and nets. Oh boy. Playing with initiative in this game is a double-edged sword, so watch out, be careful, and try out these builds for yourself. Enjoy the damage, and enjoy the unarmed dodge build. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, and we'll catch you in the next one. See yous.